You've heard the Last Supper was sacred. But do you realize, at its core, it is a ceremonial cannibalization? Why did Jesus pick this ritual? How far back into our past does its symbolism reach? What if the Last Supper was actually connected to a wolf totem ceremony, one of reversals, where the Wag outsider fed himself to his breakaway revolutionary pack before the Alpha Emperor could devour this Wag who raised his tail in defiance? The Beta who raised his tail as a Wag and stood up against the existing power structure. The most famous ritual of Western civilization, the Last Supper, is a liturgy based upon troping the cannibal power of the Carnivoresque. The Carnivoresque being a cultural framework that stretches back to when we first formed a hybrid tribe with wolves and blended our behaviors with the canine. The time we moved away from being an ape in a troop to being a human in a pack. For a full explanation of the Carnivoresque, you will want to go to the iWolf playlist and watch more videos there. A link should be showing up in the corner right about now. In this video, we will use the Carnivoresque as a deconstructive tool to decode the ritual power behind Jesus and his Last Supper. The Carnivoresque will show how the Eucharist turned the power of empire on its head and was a step towards the formation of the democratic nation-state. Because once you understand how a Wag weaponized sacrifice, the entire story of Western power starts to look very different. So the real question isn't what the Last Supper meant, but what it unleashed. Jesus, when faced with the inevitability of public execution, called his Wag followers together, and through the ritual of the Last Supper, let the collective symbolically devour his body and drink his blood. Yes, the Last Supper is a cannibal ritual, one that was purposely acted out before the representatives of the Alpha Roman Emperor had the chance to crucify Jesus where his body would be displayed like a carcass. Crucifixion, in effect, is a public butchering scaffold, a vertical rack of slaughter. In contrast, Jesus, with his eye on the future, authored a ceremony that symbolically gave leadership authority to all consumers of his text. This is a ritual that helped democratize the state, and while it is a ritual that may have been used to mystify later Alpha Christian power structures, in the time of Jesus it worked to demystify the power structure of the society he lived in. The Last Supper is not merely a farewell gathering or a theological prelude. It is a ritualized inversion of the Carnivoresque power dynamic that dominated the ancient world, a cannibal society where the Alpha consumes the subordinates symbolically, economically, and often literally through state violence. Jesus staged a counter-ritual in which the Wag is devoured by his followers and becomes life everlasting. This is not an act of submission, but a strategic reconfiguration of dominance. In the Roman imperial imagination, the right to kill was the right to rule. This permeated through all of culture, and the panoptic amphitheater was where it was repeatedly acted out. In contrast, previously in Greece, public performance was the democratic theater of spoken words and higher ideals, a Greek cultural event where ideas were explored and debate was sparked. In Rome, this was replaced by the amphitheater of spectacle, where a mob's mindless lust for blood was stimulated and then satisfied. Think of doom scrolling. Execution was not just punishment, it was a public demonstration of the emperor's Carnivoresque supremacy. The condemned body became a public sacrifice through which the state reaffirmed its monopoly on predation. From the Greek theater of thoughts to thumbs up, thumbs down tweets of an icy emperor sitting at the head of a global amphitheater. Jesus, fully aware of this cannibal logic, intervened before the state could perform its ritual consumption. He reframed the meaning of his impending death by pre-consuming himself. He offered his body and blood to his followers in symbolic form of bread and wine. This is a classic Wag move. He used the Carnivoresque grammar of power to undermine the very system that was wielding it against him. He rendered his mere material body unto Caesar, but in contrast, he first rendered his spiritual essence, manifesting it as wine and bread transformed into flesh and blood, which he then fed to his followers. A cannibal ritual of transcendence that would last through time and space. Pagan ritual is based upon sacrifice to a deity. The sacrifice is offered up by the worshippers in a symbolic feast and what is a ritual consumption or cannibalization by the heavenly authority. In Roman times, emperors were seen as gods, and the sacrifice was often human, as this was seen as the greatest of all offerings. When Jesus, who claimed to be the Son of God, offered himself up as a symbolic sacrifice to his followers, it was in effect God sacrificing his own Son to those who would follow and worship him. Even Abraham, who was asked to offer his son to God in sacrifice, was stopped at the last moment. In contrast, God in the Christian context, through the Last Supper, made the ultimate sacrifice to mankind. This was supposed to be a last supper and not a continuation of the rite of human sacrifice. Instead of the altar being the site where the worldly was handed up to God, it would become the table where God was ingested into the worldly. After Jesus introduced this ritual to the pagan world, sacrifice would become an insult to God, who had made the ultimate heavenly sacrifice. Any worldly sacrifice would now be sacrilege. By inviting his Wag followers to eat his body and drink his blood, Jesus flipped the hierarchy. As alpha of his own Wag pack, he offered himself voluntarily to his disciples in symbolic form, where authority now flowed upward from the collective who consumed God, rather than downward from the hierarchical elite, who was a God who could eat you. This is a radical redistribution of symbolic power. Instead of the emperor consuming the rebel feeds the people. This ritual transforms the followers into co-owners of the Wag's replacement alpha authority. Followers of the new pack become, in effect, micro-alphas, participants in a distributed leadership model. The Last Supper is not simply a religious moment. It is a political innovation. Jesus encodes a new form of sovereignty into a meal. Authority is no longer inherited or imposed. It is ingested. Leadership becomes participatory rather than hierarchical. The body politic becomes literalized in the bodies of the participants. This is why the ritual endured. It democratized charisma. Anyone who consumed the symbolic body became a carrier of the message, a node in a decentralized network of meaning. In a world dominated by imperial verticality, Jesus, as a religious wag, introduced horizontal power transmission. Yet the Carnivoresque continues in the background of human culture. While the Last Supper can be seen as a ritual of pagan demystification in Jesus' time, it eventually became a Remystification of Christian power later. In Jesus' context, the ritual stripped the Roman state of its exclusive right to define the meaning of death. It exposed the emperor's violence as performative rather than divine. It empowered the marginalized by giving them a share in the Alpha's symbolic flesh. And later, Christian empires, the same ritual was re-centralized. The Alpha role was reclaimed by bishops, poets, and kings. Access to the symbolic body became regulated, controlled, and politicized. The Carnivoresque returned, but in institutional form. What began as a wag-empowering ritual became a tool for new alphas to consolidate authority. Seen through the Carnivoresque lens, the Last Supper becomes one of the earliest Western attempts to democratize leadership through ritual consumption. It anticipates later political developments such as the idea that sovereignty resides in the people, the notion that authority can be shared rather than monopolized, and the belief that the body of the leader is symbolically distributed among the citizens. In this sense, the Eucharist is not only a religious sacrament, but a mythic precursor to democratic citizenship. To take and eat is to accept responsibility, agency, and participation in the collective. The Last Supper reframes sacrifice from something done to you by the empire into something offered to you to empower the pack. It is a reversal of predator-prey roles. Jesus stopped being the hunted victim and becomes the one who feeds his followers. An inversion straight out of wolf-pack ritual and early carnivoresque human behavior. The Last Supper sparks a new kind of political imagination. Once the ritual flips the hierarchy, it seeds a worldwide view where authority flows upward from the many, not downward from the Alpha. It is a cultural technology that spreads. The Eucharist becomes a repeatable, portable ritual that encodes resistance, solidarity, and shared power, perfect for building proto-democratic communities. It was the moment when a ritual cracked open the imperial order and let a new kind of social animal, the democratic human, step onto the stage. The Carnivoresque isn't just about wolves. It's about how humans learned the pack's social structure from wolves and how the dynamic of alpha, omega, beta, and wags continues to shape our world. The Carnivoresque is a tool that can help you understand the historic and modern pack behaviors of the ape with cell phones and guns as it moves into the technological hive to become a cyborg insect. So if you want to be part of the pack, well, you still can. Hunting down our story of origin, remember to feed that hungry algorithm and to like this video, subscribe, make a comment below, share this video to make the pack strong and fearless, and hit that virtual bell with your metaphoric cursor spear as we keep hunting and tracking for the signs that are hidden in the stories we tell about ourselves.